Being a strategist these days is like being a football coach. Every single person around you assumes to know how to do your job properly. And yet, the world is full of useless, meaningless, outright harmful organizational strategies. This video is about why do we keep producing strategy slop, what good strategy looks like, and equip you, hopefully, with practical managerial skills to know one from another. Let's talk about strategies. And let's start in their natural birthplace. Let's teleport ourselves in time and place where most of you have spent a day or two of your lives. Strategy sessions. Imagine, 12 months ago, yourself and the rest of the management team locked in a hotel, 40 minutes outside the city, far enough to feel strategic, close enough to get back home for dinner, discussing tons of slides to come up with the strategy. Strategy that gets captured in a document, cascaded through 4 layers of management, entered into performance management system, and added to the intranet page that nobody visits. The strategy statement in the beginning of the document was, drive sustainable growth by leveraging core strength to deliver exceptional value across all customer segments. Read that. Now read it again. Notice that it contains no information. Notice that it could describe your company, your competitor, a moderately ambitious sandwich shop. Notice that the person who wrote it was almost certainly paid more than you. What happens next is strategic performance review. And as you might have already guessed, more times than not, it's not going well. In this review, 3 business units will describe how they've spent the whole year working in 3 different directions. 4th one will tell they've been working in the right direction, which would be encouraging, except when they ask why, they cite a hunch. The numbers, as CFO will put it, are mixed. The word organizations use when they mean bad, but they need to retain people responsible for bad numbers. The root cause for insufficient performance in this session will be identified as, try to contain your surprise, poor strategic alignment. Not the strategy, but poor performance by people who were supposed to execute it. Of course it is. You have been in the strategy session. You might have even booked post-it notes for it. The specific details change. The hotel, the CFO preferred euphemism for bad, the number of business units working cross purposes, but the structure is identical everywhere. I have been in hundreds of those rooms. In those rooms, we have all watched our organizations mistake a well-worded aspirations for strategy, spend a year discovering that it isn't, and respond by producing more ambitious version of the same mistake. This video, this lesson is about why that keeps happening in strategy sessions and what we can do about it. First, let's discuss what strategy actually is, because the word strategy has been so thoroughly abused that it no longer means anything in most organizations. A strategy is a choice, specifically the choice where your organization will compete and how it will win there. Not a preference, not an ambition, a choice. Which means it closes doors as well as opening them. For you as a manager, and this is important, strategy is not an abstract concern, because the quality of your organization's strategy determines the quality of every decision your team makes. When strategy is clear, your team knows which opportunities to pursue, which to decline, which trade-offs to make and which to resist, which work matters and which is a complete noise. When your strategy is poor, and you have lived through this, every one of those decisions gets made on instinct, interpretation, and whatever the loudest voice in the last meeting said. Both approaches produce activity. Only one produces results that compound in the same direction. Most of what your organization calls strategy is not actually strategy. It is an aspiration, description of a desired outcome without the logic on how to achieve it. Now, let me show you 3 specific ways in which organizations are failing to develop their strategies. You will recognize all 3. You might have produced a couple of them yourself. Somewhere in your organization, someone has confused describing the trophy with having a plan to win it. The trophy is usually a number.
Around 6'7". 6'7".
Double revenue, 30% market share, top quartile by 2027. These are outcomes. Outcome is not a strategy any more than I want to be thin is a diet. Wanting a result and having a logic for achieving it are different things. Every organization that mistakes one for the other, including the ones I have worked in personally, spends considerable time and money discovering the difference at the worst possible moment.
Something's wrong, I can feel it.
The goal tells you where you want to end up. The strategy tells you how. One without the other is not an incomplete strategy, it's a deadline attached to a hope. And a hope as a management tool has a remarkably poor track record. So don't make that mistake. Make sure your strategy session is not structured around debating a single ambitious metric that everyone assumes as a target. Make sure that you fight that impulse in the room, because the room will impatiently attempt to jump to the juicy part, where they will dream about doubling, tripling, quadrupling, whatever the latest board of directors ordained priority is. The second failure is in the language itself. Somewhere in your strategy document, there's a sentence that survived multiple rounds of leadership reviews, 2 rounds of wordsmithing, and emerged magnificently, heroically, meaningless. It reads something like, accelerate transformative growth through purpose-led customer excellence. Read it. Try to work out what it is asking you to do differently on a Monday morning. You cannot. Nobody can. And that's not an accident. The sentence cannot be wrong because it cannot be tested. It cannot fail because it cannot be measured. It cannot be challenged because it does not actually say anything. Here is the test you can run on your own strategy. If your strategy statement would look equally at home on your competitor's website, on a motivational poster, or on the wall of an airport business lounge, it has not said anything. The fact that your strategy is such because it was designed as such. It was designed to be meaningless and therefore able to avoid any accountability. And accountability, by definition, is uncomfortable. Set your strategy session in a way that whatever strategic options you produce, they make someone uncomfortable. That discomfort is your strategy session working. The third one is the most insidious because it sounds like wisdom. At some point during your strategy session, you will be discussing specifics and someone will say, we don't want to be too prescriptive. This will be greeted with nodding. It will feel like maturity. It will feel like wisdom because the room has collectively decided to trust people doing the work rather than constraining them with unnecessary detail. It's not maturity. It is the moment your strategy stops producing strategy and starts producing a very expensive permission slip for everyone in that room to do whatever they were already planning to do anyway. Avoid that at all costs. Make sure that the room understands that having a strategy means having it cost something, and that unless there is a clear logic describing who and how does that something, sometimes in a prescriptive way, the strategy simply doesn't work.
What did it cost?
Everything.
You might have noticed that these 3 failures look different, but at core, they are actually the same failure. They are betrayal of the definition of strategy that we have discussed earlier. Those failures are all form of the same thing. They are a form of refusing to choose. So what do you actually do? Is there hope, or our strategy sessions are a form of corporate limbo where we all get stuck once a year? Well, good news, you can and should do things properly. Let's talk about 4 things that you should be doing in a strategy session. 1. Prioritize. Make sure your strategy session has an inbuilt, robust prioritization mechanism. The most reliable indicator that your organization does not have a real strategy is that everything is a priority. Not 3 things, not 5 things, everything. Real focus comes from a strategy that has made hard choices at the top. And your job as a manager is to hold those choices under pressure.
There are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Because when the people above you have not made the hard choices and you are not managing priorities, you are refereeing an argument that nobody has the authority to end. When you conclude your session, make sure that your strategic discussions were specific, not universal. Take your strategy output, read it, then go to competitors' website, read theirs. If they are interchangeable, you have not differentiated yourself.
They're the same picture.
Test is simple and brutal. If your strategy works equally well for your competitor, it's not a strategy, it's an industry description. Push past an aspiration and demand the logic. Ask which customers you serve, which you will not. Where you will invest and where you will stop. Ask what this strategy means for the decision your team will face on Tuesday afternoon when two priorities conflict. The hardest one. Make sure your strategy output is able to upset someone. You have been in a strategy session that ended up with everyone shaking hands, agreeing it was a productive day. The vision was inspiring. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody lost anything. That's not a strategy session. That's a group of people protecting what they already have. Real strategy is uncomfortable because real choices require real trade-offs, and real trade-offs means someone's thing does not make a cut. And sometimes that someone is you. When real choices are made, you will notice it. The room will get quiet. Someone will ask a clarifying question that's not really a clarifying question. Someone will check their phone. Make sure the strategy you are developing upsets some people in the room. Not insult them, upset them. Because choices, real choices in an environment of resource constraint will always upset someone. That moment, those upset people, this is not a dysfunction. This moment is your strategy becoming real. Let me talk to you about 4 cases where I think strategy sessions produced something impactful. 2 failures and 2 successes. The first one is WeWork. WeWork raised $12.8 billion on a strategic premise that it was a technology company rather than a real estate business. They were probably sitting in a room where they designed a strategy worded so carefully that no one could ever prove it wrong. And market proved it wrong in roughly 8 weeks. When the IPO process forced honest scrutiny on their valuation, this valuation dropped from 47 billions to under 8. The strategy has not failed. It has never existed. What this real estate business had was an aspiration dressed in a tech slang instead of a real strategy. Because renting desks by months is a real estate business regardless of how many kombucha taps you install. What WeWork strategy sessions should have done was to connect an aspiration to an honest logic of winning. And instead of this honest logic, they chose storytelling that instead of reality. The market eventually gets final edit on any story. Second case. During the pandemic, Peloton strategy sessions produced a decision to scale manufacturing capacity as if the entire world has permanently decided that exercise bikes were preferable to gyms. This was, in retrospect, optimistic. The where-to-play choice was real. The how-to-win logic was real. What was missing? An honest assessment that nobody in those rooms asks, what happens when the moment ends? When the gyms reopened, demand normalized, Peloton was left with a cost structure built for a market that has briefly existed and then quietly disappeared. The company lost 75% of its market value in 2022. The bikes were excellent. The strategy was a deadline attached to a hope. What Peloton strategy session should have produced was cost of that strategy. And that cost of scaling capacity in a pandemic-level demand was a bet, not a plan. And that the bet had a specific failure condition that needed to be named before capacity was ordered. That question was not hard. It was just not the kind of question that gets asked in a room excited about numbers. Third, in 2021, Anthropic strategy sessions likely produced a choice that the industry read as a limitation. While OpenAI chased 900 million customers with image generation, video tools, and the ambition to become the internet's operating system, Anthropic declined to compete in any of it. No viral features, no image generation, no video, just a very good model deployed reliably for enterprises doing serious work. The way to play choice was specific enough to create losers inside the organization every time consumer feature was declined in those rooms and the news cycle was deliberately not won. Nobody, unlikely, I think, left those meetings smiling. And then, after they had those choices, numbers arrived. Anthropic grew from 1 billion annualized revenue at the start of 2025 to 30 billion in April 2026. 80% from business customers. Claude Code, which did not exist before May 2025, is now generating 2.5 billion annualized revenue on its own. And, full disclosure, this video being delivered in part by Claude, which is in itself the product of the strategic choice this case study describes. The confirmation that the choice was correct came not from Anthropic, it came from OpenAI. In March 2026, OpenAI shut down its consumer video platform. Disney walked away from a $1 billion deal just announced. OpenAI announced it was pivoting towards enterprise. What Anthropic strategy sessions got right was not complicated. They prioritized one customer and declined to pursue everything else. They built something their biggest rival could not adopt word for word. The discomfort in those strategy rooms was most probably serious, but that was strategy working. Fourth case. In 2014, Satya and Nadella inherited a company which strategy was to defend Windows and Office against everything. Well, you might know this company as Microsoft. In his first strategy sessions and CEO, most probably Nadella made an explicit choice to abandon Windows first logic, to reposition Microsoft around cloud productivity across all platforms, including those platforms of competitors. It required naming what would not be pursued. It required creating losers inside the organization. It required the kind of internal discomfort that signals something real has been decided. Market capitalization went from 300 billion in 2014 to over 3 trillion in 2024. The strategy that produced this was not ambitious aspirations about being most innovative company. It was a specific choice, specific enough to be wrong, honest enough to create losers, focused enough to rule something out. The Windows first logic was incompatible with cloud first future. Someone's empire was going to shrink so that someone else's could grow. Nadella refused to produce language that offended no one, because a strategy that repositions a company against its own legacy will always offend someone. The people it offends are usually the people whose thing did not survive the discussion in a strategy session. But, $2 trillion later, the discomfort produced in the strategy session likely was worth it, and always is when the choice in your strategy is real. To conclude, strategy is not complicated. It is hard, because it requires you to make specific choices in the presence of people who would prefer you did not. They would prefer your language stays broad, your options stay open, your documents stay comfortable, not knowing that discomfort is your strategy arriving. The moment rooms gets quiet after a real choice, someone asks a clarifying question that's not really a clarifying question, and someone else checks their phone quietly. That moment, you are the closest to something real. Your job as a manager is in those strategy sessions is to stay in that moment, rather than resolve it prematurely with the language everyone can agree with and nobody can act on. Push for a specific answer. Name the trade-offs. Count the casualties. And when you have finally something specific enough to be wrong, something honest enough to create losers, something focused enough to rule something else out, this is when the actual work begins. Until then, you're not doing strategy, you're having a very expensive conversation about actually having one. This has been a meme guide to management. Good luck.